well, the Europeans, they came up with this ways they could counter Trump. That is, well, we can, because you can't go to war against the United States, obviously, but they could threaten to expel U.S. troops from bases. And I thought, but but the Europeans want them to stay there. That was the whole point. In August, when Trump was telling more or less the Baltic states and others that we're planning to pull down our forces, we'll draw down our forces in Europe, in the Baltic states, the Europeans went to panic. Suddenly, we have all these nonsense stories about Russian drones near airports with absolute zero evidence. The Russians violating Estonian airspace. The hybrid war is coming. Oh, America, you can't go. This. I mean, it's the Europeans who want the Americans to stay, and it's the Americans who want to reduce their presence. So it seemed like a very strange punishment indeed. Um, but I often make the point that what the Europeans should do is just well, essentially threaten that they will respond militarily, because this would be a disaster. It looks like Trump, the source of his success is to make everything short wars. So, but like Panama, he makes a little threat. They give him something. Same as Gaza, just let the Israelis just burn everything down, but then put something in place to stop it. Bomb Iran for a few days, strike, and then come in and make a peace deal, get it over with. And now Venezuela as well. A lot of the hawks now are a bit critical because they're saying, well, this isn't nation building. We haven't taken over the government. But instead, he's claiming that the acting president will have to do as he's told, otherwise he'll strike some more. Again, he's looking for quick fixes. I think he's not a opponent of wars. He's just an opponent of a forever wars. So as soon as he can get the war over quickly and then move on to the next one, that's a success. So, if the Danes don't want to lose Greenland, just put in place something that might pull in the United States over long term or create more of a scandal. And, he can't be bothered. He has so many other projects he wants to move on to, which he, can be quick in and out. And I just, I think people either want to see him as being a warmonger or a man of peace. I just think he's willing to use military force in any way to achieve his goals, but he doesn't want to get drawn in. That's when all your resources, all your focus, everything gets sucked in, and you can't really do anything else. And I think that's his main concern. I'm not sure if you see it the same way, that this is, I guess,
Well,
this is his approach.
it's too early really to draw conclusions on what his real objectives are. He doesn't tip his hand. That is the main tactic that he uses as a negotiator, to be an unknown. I think as commentators, we have an obligation to draw a distinction between what we'd like to see happen and what we acknowledge may happen. And I've just described what I would like to see happen, that he proceeds in a bellicose way and the Europeans cut off their nose to spite their face, as we say in American English. That is, they do themselves harm, thinking they're going to harm him by disbanding NATO. But the reality is, the other reality, the greater likelihood is that there will be an accommodation with Denmark. The 25 out of 27 European heads of state or heads of government will very likely, quietly, behind closed doors, apply maximum pressure on Denmark to just shut up and get it over with, and to take the offer that Trump gives them to buy them out. I think to buy out the population of Greenland, the Inuits there, would probably take $1 million per person. That's $55 million. It's small change. Don't even count that. But some billions to Denmark to get them to agree to the sale. I think that's probably has a greater likelihood than the scenario that I prefer, the end of NATO. Denmark has a very strong social market economy with a very good, still intact social services, and they are going to be impacted terribly as the budget for defense rises to 5% of GDP. A helping hand from Mr. Trump could make Denmark one of the biggest winners in the coming 10 years by providing them with the capital to do both guns and butter, while their neighbors in the EU will not have that cushion that Mr. Trump is about to provide.
Well, I recently spoke with Professor Mersheimer. He was making the point that we already long ago crossed the line of a proxy war to a direct war. That is, that these attacks are now not through Ukraine, but we are engaging directly. And I guess the only question now is when does Russia retaliate directly? Because as we saw with Doreshnik, they struck energy facilities in western Ukraine. But the warning, nonetheless, was for the NATO countries. But the West isn't really taking these warnings. And again, it has to be pointed out that what the whole purpose why there's a warning, why they haven't struck yet, is because uh, well, then you can't stop the escalation anymore. Then it will spiral out of control. But how close are we to a massive direct war? Because once Russia retaliates against NATO, then we are at war without any pretense of simply helping Ukraine. So uh, again, I know that the Russians are restrained so far, and but there's still a mounting pressure on President Putin. And but in the West here, especially in Europe, they're very dismissive. They just see this as, we can't reward their bullying or their threats. It's our moral obligation to ignore any deterrent that the Russians are putting up there. So how close do you think we are to well, not a world war, but a direct war between NATO countries and Russia by them actually beginning to retaliate? But in other areas, we also see that Russia's going up the escalation ladder. That is, at least it's um, carrying out more destructive attacks. So again, not just well, obviously on the energy infrastructure, other infrastructure that upholds the economic and military potential of Ukraine. And as a good example, if I'm not mistaken, Klitschko's the mayor of Kiev. He made the request now for citizens, that is of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, if they can, they should start leaving the capital, given that there's no electricity in many parts. And again, the whole idea is we can't sustain this large population, get out. And I've heard from several Russian sources, this is essentially what Russia would like, because once people begin to leave the big cities, then, well, there's many benefits. One would be then the economy wouldn't work as usual, the military potential declines, but also if Russia wants to seize Kiev, it's much easier to do if you don't have millions of people there who could, well, essentially end up as human shields or be killed, because this is not something, well, nobody wants to see mass casualties.